Hey folks, today I want to talk about Crusader Kings 3 and how ships work in this game and what we might see in this year's content for the game. So as you know, if you play Crusader Kings 2, you did have a fleet of your own in that game, or at least one that your realm had control of. This was built up through shipyards. You could build these, it would give you extra ship capacity, and then that would allow you, very similar to how like levies are raised in the game at the moment, it would allow you to raise these ships up in these different shipyards, and then you would use those to transport your troops around the map. Now, obviously, this had some upsides and some downsides. The downsides to this system, and I believe the reason why they got rid of it, was that it was very micromanagey. You had to have all these different shipyards. You had to bring your ships together into one place, then put your troops on it, transport that somewhere else, then take your troops off those ships. They were also very expensive to have raised up, and I think, to be honest, they didn't bring that much fun gameplay to the game. It was kind of fun to have them, you know, transporting your troops around, but I think it didn't really bring that much like actual gameplay. It was really more annoying to use rather than some kind of strategic gameplay to the game. Again, I think that's why they got rid of it. And also I think the AI was generally like bad at actually using them correctly, making sure they had enough shipyards, making sure they had enough ships to transport their troops. So you could have a larger nation declare war on you if they had to use their ships to get to you. So you're playing as England and then you were up against France or somebody. You could get into a situation where they wouldn't have built enough shipyards. So then they had to like drip feed their troops into your realm and you could just easily pick them off. If you play Europa Universalis 4 or 5, you've probably seen this play out in that game a little bit, where you have to have these transport ships, and if people don't build them, it kind of skews how warfare goes. I think, again, this is another reason why they got rid of it for Crusader Kings 3. Now, I know a lot of people don't really like the Crusader Kings 3 system. I think, though, to be honest, the longer the game's been out, it's less of an issue than when it first was released. People really didn't like it, that you basically just got like magic fleets that appeared, and then as you see in the game at the moment, you just pay a fee to transport your troops wherever you like. And to be honest, for myself, I think I actually prefer this system. Yes, it is a little bit weird how they just appear from somewhere, you pay the money for them, and then they disappear once you've landed your troops. It is a little bit odd how that works, but I think, to be honest, like, what gameplay have we actually lost from that? Yes, you had to build shipyards, and yes, I guess you had to be a little bit more strategic. You had to make sure you built enough ships so you could take enough troops to win your warfare goals, but you could also use your ships to, you know, take half your army, then take the other half of your army over, and it wasn't that too much of an issue for most players, I don't think. I will say one of the bad outcomes of how it works is that it doesn't limit at all how big an army somebody can take into your realm through one set of ships. As I was just saying for Crusader Kings 2, it did limit how big an army you could land somewhere. Obviously, if you invested in a lot of shipyards, there wasn't really any limit on how big an army you could transport, but it was also extremely expensive to do that. I think in Crusader Kings 3, that is the downside of this system. It just magically makes enough ships. Yes, the costs do get bigger and bigger, especially obviously if you're not a raiding nation, which do get a discount usually. It does mean that you can transport an entire massive army and just land somewhere. So obviously, say you're attacking England and you're Castile or somebody, you wouldn't usually be able to transport like 30,000 troops on a fleet that easily. But in the game, yes, you just click there and they transport up there basically. And yes, it will cost you a lot of money, but there is no strategy around like how many troops you could take. It would give some additional gameplay, I suppose, about thinking, I want to attack that realm, but I don't have enough ships, so I am going to have to be a little bit more careful about how I do this or don't do this in Crusader Kings 3 versus Crusader Kings 2. But anyway, guys, why are we talking about this today? Well, it's because we all think that this year we're going to get some kind of Merchant Republic DLC and some kind of trading in the game. However that turns up, I've talked about that in a previous video, so I won't talk about it today, like the actual mechanics around trading. But I do think with the introduction of these, it would make sense, I suppose, for us to get some kind of fleet or ship mechanics, especially for those Merchant Republics. As I said in my What Might Come in Chapter 5 video, there is a chance we'll get some kind of ship mechanics, especially for the Merchant Republics, but maybe not everybody else. You could have it where the current system stays for fleets, but instead of your money just going to some magical place, that money instead would go to the nearest Merchant Republic, and you could even have like the fleet size that you can use for your army limited by how many ships that Merchant Republic had. Actually, that could be a fun way for it to work. As those Merchant Republics, you could build up a fleet and then hire it out to people. And then also as the other realms, if you're thinking, I'm going to need a lot of ships, maybe you could go to those Merchant Republics and say, look, I need you to have more ships, I'll help fund those ships, and then they will get more and more ship capacity, and then when you did do your transports, it would then pull from those ships instead. As through all this video, do let me know in the comments down below what you think about everything in this. Again, from here it's just what we think might come. with this year's content, especially if they are bringing in Merchant Republics. I think that would be a fun way for it to work. Tie them to those Merchant Republics in some way, and that could be a gameplay cycle for playing a Merchant Republic, especially as we know they're probably going to be in most areas of the map, as historically there were, very trade-focused cities and realms that did exist in this time frame. Now, one way they could keep the Crusader Kings 3 system, but bring some additional mechanics to it, is basically have it how it works now, but bring in the shipyards from Crusader Kings 2. So maybe you have to have those shipyards. That would then give you that transport capacity, but instead of having to raise them up like levies, bring them all together, transport your troops elsewhere, it would basically keep the system we have now. So they would magically appear on the coastline when you are boarding your troops, but it would be limited in size and costed based on the shipyards you had. So maybe you'd have 10 shipyards or docks. Maybe that gives you 20 ship capacity. Each one of those ships can carry 100 people, and then you would be able to use that, transport your troops across the sea, and then go back and bring the rest of your troops over the sea as well. So that would be like an in-between between how it works now in Crusader Kings and how it worked in Crusader Kings 2, but it would get rid of the micromanaging of having to bring your levies together as ships and then using those to manually transport your troops. You would have today's system, but the numbers and cost of those ships would be limited by your shipyards and docks, and then also the cost would change. I think they would bring in a system similar to Crusader Kings 2, where if you didn't have any of those, you would be able to hire a fleet. Again, that could tie into Merchant Republics. You could have your own fleet, but if you really want to get your entire army somewhere else and you don't have the capacity to do so, you could then pay for the extra ships from a Merchant Republic and then use those to transport your fleet elsewhere. I don't know what you guys think about that. Let me know in the comments. I think that would be a fun way to bring some mechanics over, but not the micromanaging of having to raise your ships every time, bring them together, load your troops on, disband those fleets as soon as you've delivered your troops wherever they're going, and then save the money from having them raised, because that was very expensive. It was literally in Crusader Kings 2, how quick can I get my army delivered? And then I'm going to disband my fleet immediately because I can't afford to keep paying them. I think that would be a fun way for it to work. The other thing, of course, is how Merchant Republics could make use of ships. And I think the best way this could work is similar to what you can see at the moment. If we have this character here, he's living in Venice for some reason, and maybe he's trying to transport somewhere. This is currently an unlanded gameplay character. You could use this instead for how you set up trade routes as a Merchant Republic, and then have those ships, sailing up and down this trade route. It would bring a more dynamic look to the map. You would see those ships sailing up and down, doing whatever trading they're doing, and then maybe you could even have events similar again to unlanded gameplay. These ships are sailing up and down. You would occasionally hear, hey ruler, you have this trade route going on, but it's being attacked by pirates. Maybe there's some natural disaster or storm that's affected that fleet, and then you would have to try get it home through some events or something like that. I think that would be fun to have ships actually on the map itself, kind of sailing around, and I think this is potentially how trading might work. Again, I've done a video about that in the past, how I think this system could be used for making trade routes for Merchant Republics, and then as I said, you'll be able to see those on the map. And then I'm not sure, guys, would you want to be able to raid those yourself as a certain type of ruler? Maybe if you are a raider, you could just raise ships, and then you'd be able to raise those fleets up, take them into one of these trade routes, and try raid these ships as they go up and down one of these trade routes. That actually could be a really fun way to bring this to those realms as well. Again, if we think about having the shipyards, the docks, similar to Crusader Kings 2, but as I said, for most realms, you wouldn't actually manually control the ships and then manually bring troops onto them. It would work how it currently does, but that would kind of limit how big those fleets would be. Maybe for raiding nations, you would be able to raise those ships up and then maybe go off and attack other raiding nations, or especially for these trade routes, you'd be able to take your ships onto these trade routes and then try looting those ships. And I think as the Merchant Republic, you wouldn't necessarily have to have a dedicated fleet to fight these off, but you could invest in this trade route, maybe have escort vessels you paid for to make sure this wasn't raided easily. And again, that could bring some cool mechanics across the game, especially for raiding nations. Currently, yeah, they're pretty fun to play, but imagine if in the Merchant Republic DLC, on top of all those new mechanics, if you're playing the other side of it, you are that raiding nation and thinking, hey, I'm going to go loot that trade route, you would have some mechanics that are actually gameplay focused, where you can take a fleet, find these ships, and then have either through events or some other mechanic, a battle, take that loot home, get some prestige out of it, all those fun things. Maybe you find some artifacts they were transporting, all these different ways it could work. And then again, I think that brings some additional gameplay outside of the Merchant Republics in that DLC. But anyway, folks, just a quick video today. I'm enjoying making these little discussion videos. I know there's not too much going on in the background whilst I'm yapping away, but hopefully you enjoy them. Let me know in the comments down below. Do you want ships to return properly in CK3? Or do you think like the halfway method I'm talking about could be a good way for them to be brought in, but limiting the micromanaging side of it as well? But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Hit the like button if you've enjoyed today's video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I cover all the news around Crusader Kings 3. We're going to find out about the next chapter pass probably in the next month or two, and I'll be talking about that. And then once we get the announcement, we can discuss like what we think is coming in that DLC and where we think the game might be going in 2026. But we'll leave it there for today, and I'll see you all next time.